In 146 BCE, the Roman Senate did something that had no military justification whatsoever. Carthage had already surrendered. Its army was broken, its navy gone, its people offering their own children as hostages. Rome had won. And then Scipio Aemilianus ordered his soldiers to burn the city anyway, not for a week, but for 17 days straight. When the fires finally cooled, Roman crews moved through the rubble with a specific assignment: locate and destroy a library holding 500,000 volumes, the largest collection of agricultural and commercial knowledge in the ancient world. Texts that documented centuries of Carthaginian farming techniques so advanced that Rome's own Senate would later distribute one surviving manual, just one, to Italian landowners because they could not replicate what it contained. Cato the Elder had spent decades ending every single Senate speech with the same 4 words, not because Carthage threatened Rome's legions, because it threatened something Rome feared far more. So why did a civilization that had already lost everything still need to be made to disappear? And what exactly were they afraid those scrolls would teach? And while you are down there, I would love to know, was Rome's destruction of Carthage an act of fear, or the most calculated strategic decision in the ancient world? But before our journey begins, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight. The harbor is full of smoke, not the churning, violent smoke of a battle still being decided, but something older and more settled than that. The particular grey weight of a fire that has been burning for 3 weeks and has run out of anything left to consume. It sits above the African coast like a judgment rendered in a language older than Latin, older than any tongue that survives to name it. The Mediterranean below catches the light of a sun it can barely find through the haze, and the water, which should be blue, is the color of old pewter, flat and without reflection. The city is gone, not damaged, not broken in the way that cities are broken by war and then, over seasons and years, rebuilt by the stubborn insistence of people who have nowhere else to go, gone in a way that is deliberate and complete and final. In a way that required planning and intention and the sustained application of Roman will across 17 days of systematic work. What was Carthage? The merchant quarters with their counting rooms and warehouses, the residential districts climbing toward the temple heights, the colonnades and marketplaces and public squares where 6 centuries of cosmopolitan life arranged and rearranged itself each morning, is now a continuous field of ruin, and the geometry of it, the human geometry of it, the human geometry of streets and corners and doorways, has been replaced by something that has no geometry at all. Only ash, only rubble, only the particular sweetness rising from the heart of the fire that a man with a certain education would recognize immediately, and that a man without one would struggle to name. It is the smell of papyrus burning, which is to say, it is the smell of books, 500,000 of them, the contents of the greatest library on the African continent, the accumulated written intelligence of a civilization that has spent 6 centuries learning how to make arid land bloom, how to read the stars above the Mediterranean, how to calculate the mathematics of trade across distances that would have seemed impossible to earlier peoples, the agricultural treatises, the astronomical tables, the medical texts, the philosophical works, the careful, empirical, generation-by-generation records of what the North African soil will yield if you understand it, if you listen to it, if you treat it not as a resource to be extracted, but as a system to be learned. All of it rising now in the sweet grey smoke above the harbour, becoming ash above the water, becoming nothing above the sky. On the ridge above the city, a Roman general stands and watches. His name is Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus Africanus, and he is 37 years old, and he is weeping. He is not a man given to public emotion. Rome does not produce such men, or rather Rome produces them and then instructs them carefully in the management of what they feel, the arrangement of feeling behind the face of competence, that the Republic demands. He has done his work here with exactly the cold professional precision that his city admires above all other virtues. The siege has lasted 3 years. The final assault has lasted 17 days. He has been methodical and thorough, and he has not flinched from what was required, and the result is visible in every direction from where he stands. The proof of his competence rendered in fire and silence, and the particular sweet smell of burning knowledge carried on a warm African wind. He has done exactly what he was sent to do, and he is weeping. Beside him stands a man named Polybius. He is not a soldier. He is a Greek historian, 50 years old, who has attached himself to this army with the specific and consuming intention of bearing witness to something he understands, even before it is complete. To be one of the hinge moments of the world, he has traveled with this army through its years of siege work, through the grinding logistics of starvation and assault, through the final breach and the 17 days of street by street, quarter, shelf by quarter, shelf by shelf erasure. He has seen things in those 17 days that he will spend the rest of his life finding language for, and now he stands beside the man who commanded all of it. And he watches the commander weep, and he understands that what is happening in Scipio's face is not grief for Carthage. Polybius asks him what troubles him. Scipio is quiet for a long moment. The smoke moves above the harbour. The sweet smell of burning papyrus moves with it. Then he answers, and what he says is not about Carthage at all. He says he is thinking of Rome. He says he is thinking of the day, which will come, which must come, which the pattern of all human things insists must come, when some other conqueror will stand on a ridge above a burning Rome and feel precisely this sensation. The sensation of watching permanence become ash. The sensation of understanding in a single afternoon that nothing is permanent, that the thing which feels most solid, most inevitable, most continuous with the future is only a city. Only stone and wood and papyrus and the organized habits of people who have chosen to live together in a particular place and call it forever. Let this statement breathe. It is not weakness. It is not sentiment. It is a moment of terrible lucidity in a man who has just accomplished the most complete act of civilizational erasure in the ancient record, and who understands, standing in its smoke, exactly what he has demonstrated. He has not merely defeated Carthage. Carthage was defeated 56 years ago at Zama, when his grandfather by adoption stood across a battlefield from Hannibal Barca and ended the Second Punic War. What Scipio has done here is something different in kind, not merely in degree. He has shown that a civilization, not an army, not a government, not a ruling class, but a civilization, with its libraries and its agricultural knowledge and its commercial systems and its accumulated centuries of learned intelligence, can be not merely defeated, but unmade, deliberately, systematically, completely, and that possibility will now exist in the world forever. This is what the tears are about. He has just proven something that cannot be unproven. The systematic unmaking of a civilization, street by street, quarter by quarter, shelf by shelf, has now been shown to be possible. And that possibility will outlast every empire present on this ridge, including his own, including Rome, including the Republic whose will he has so competently executed. He has handed the future a method. He weeps because he is intelligent enough to know it. Polybius watches him and says nothing more. Below them, the harbour that was once the most consequential commercial port in the ancient Mediterranean world, the harbour whose engineering alone represented a century of accumulated knowledge, whose geometry of circular military basin and rectangular merchant port had been the organizing intelligence of half the known world's trade, is unrecognizable. Its waters are grey and still. The warehouses that lined it, the counting rooms and the chandlers and the offices where merchants from a dozen languages conducted the organized commerce of an empire, are rubble at the waterline. The ships that filled it are gone, surrendered or burned or both. The harbor itself remains, as harbors do, because water cannot be destroyed. But everything that made it mean something is ash. There is a detail that the history will record, or rather a detail that the history will almost not record, that almost disappears in the noise of the larger destruction. But that a man paying close attention to what Rome actually does in the aftermath of Carthage's burning will find instructive. The agricultural texts, the treatises on crop rotation and soil amendment and olive cultivation, and the deep practical science of making North African land productive are not simply burned with the rest of the library. Some of them are recovered. Some of them are distributed by the Roman Senate to its African client kings. They are considered valuable enough to redirect, to preserve in the hands of Rome's allies, to keep functioning in the world. But they are not brought to Rome. They are not placed in a Roman library. They are not honored as the knowledge of a civilization that has spent 6 centuries learning something Rome has not. They are distributed like property, like useful tools given to people who can be trusted to use them without becoming dangerous. This single decision, to redirect rather than preserve, to use rather than honor, speaks to something the Roman Senate understands about what it has done here. It understands that the knowledge was real. It understands that the agricultural intelligence encoded in those 500,000 volumes represented a form of power that no treaty could confiscate and no battlefield could destroy. Cato understood this. Cato, who spent the last decades of his life ending every Senate speech with the same 5 words, regardless of the speech's subject. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Cato understood that a Carthage rebuilding its farms and recovering its commercial systems was more dangerous in some ways than a Carthage at war. Because a Carthage at war could be defeated. A Carthage that simply continued to exist, continued to accumulate, continued to know what it knew about the world. That Carthage was a threat that no military victory could permanently resolve, and so it is resolved permanently in another way. The fire burns. The sweet smell of papyrus moves across the African coast on the warm wind. Scipio stands on the ridge above it and weeps and speaks his prophecy about Rome. And Polybius stands beside him and commits it to memory with the disciplined attention of a man who understands that he is watching something that will need to be explained for a very long time. The harbor below is still. The smoke above is moving. The silence where a city was is not yet complete. There are still sounds, the settling of stone, the last language of a fire consuming its final fuel. But the silence is coming. It is very close now. It will take 11 more days for the fire to finish. When it does, the silence that settles over this coastline is unlike the silence that follows battles, which always contains the sounds of aftermath, the wounded, the grieving, the beginning of whatever comes next. This silence contains none of that. It is the specific, absolute quiet of a place from which all human sound has been permanently removed. No voices in the market, no children in the streets, no scholars in the library reaching for a scroll in the particular rustling quiet of a room full of accumulated thought. No sailors in the harbor calling to one another across the water in Phoenician, in Greek, in the half-dozen languages that a cosmopolitan port generates naturally, the way a river generates its own weather. Nothing. Only the sound of the Mediterranean against a coastline that no longer knows what it is. We begin here at the end because the end is the only place from which the full shape of the story becomes visible. From here, standing in the smoke of 146 BCE, looking back across 6 centuries of Carthaginian civilization and forward across the long shadow it will cast across every subsequent act of deliberate cultural annihilation in the Western record, the story reveals itself entire, not as a story of military victory or defeat, not as a story of the rise and fall of powers in the ancient world, but as a story about knowledge, about what a civilization knows and what it costs the world when that knowledge is treated not as a treasure to be kept, but as a weapon to be destroyed. The smoke rises above the African coast. Scipio watches it. Polybius watches Scipio. And somewhere in the ash below, 6 centuries of accumulated human intelligence settles slowly, finally, into the North African soil they spent so long learning to understand. To understand what burned, we must first understand what was built. And to understand what was built, we must go back to a shore that was, in 814 BCE, nothing but salt grass and the particular quality of North African light that turns the sea the color of hammered bronze in the late afternoon. There is no city here yet. There is no harbor, no wall, no column of smoke from a foundry or a kitchen fire. There is only the curve of the bay, the smell of the sea mixing with something drier and more ancient underneath. The smell of African earth, patient and particular, waiting. The Mediterranean at this hour does not look like a road. It looks like a mirror, and into this mirror, from the east, from the great Phoenician city of Tyre on the coast of what is now Lebanon, come ships. They carry everything a people carry when they understand they are not coming back. The legend names their leader Dido, a queen in exile, her brother on the throne she should have inherited, her husband murdered for his wealth and his inconvenience. She has crossed the sea, not in defeat but in calculation. She arrives on this North African coast and she asks the local Berber king, Iarbes, for land. Not much land, she says. Only as much as a single ox hide can cover. Iarbes agrees. It seems a small price for the departure of an inconvenient stranger. And then Dido takes the ox hide and cuts it. She cuts it, not into pieces, but into a single continuous strip, thin as a thread, long as patience. And she lays that strip in a great circle around a hilltop above the bay. The land enclosed is not the square footage of a tent. It is the footprint of a citadel. Iarbes has been outthought. He knows it. The land is hers. This story is not merely charming. It is a founding parable. And like all founding parables, it encodes within it the essential character of the people it describes. Dido does not overpower the king. She does not bribe him or threaten him or appeal to any authority above his own. She solves the problem laterally. She looks at a constraint, one ox hide, and finds within it a geometry that no one else in the room has considered. This is how Carthage will operate for 600 years, not through brute imposition, but through the disciplined application of intelligence to the specific shape of the problem at hand. The Phoenicians have been doing this for centuries before Dido ever sets foot on African soil. They invented the alphabet, not as an act of cultural vanity, but as a practical technology for recording commercial transactions across distances too great for memory alone to manage. They understood that information, reliably transmitted, is worth more than any single cargo. They understood that the real product of trade is not the goods exchanged, but the system through which goods can move at all. Dido's city will carry this inheritance forward and make it magnificent. The place she has chosen is not chosen by accident. The bay curves in a way that shelters ships from the prevailing winds. The hilltop, bursa, they call it, a word that may itself echo the word for hide, the founding trick still embedded in the place name, commands the surrounding terrain. The narrow isthmus connecting this promontory to the African interior is defensible. The soil of the hinterland beyond is deep and dark and rich in a way that surprises people who think of North Africa as nothing but desert. Dido or her settlers or the generations that follow them see all of this not merely as geography but as possibility. They begin to build. What they build over the centuries that follow is not a city in the way that the word is sometimes used to mean a collection of buildings and people. Carthage, Court Hadar, and Phoenician, the new city, is a system. It is an organized intelligence, made physical, made permanent, made capable of perpetuating itself across time. The harbours alone are a statement of ambition so large it requires a moment to absorb fully. The military harbour is circular, engineered to house 220 warships in covered slips arranged around a central island where the admiral's residence and command post stand above the waterline. 220 warships, each one in its own berth. Each berth covered, protected from weather and from the observation of foreign eyes. The harbour is designed so that its full military capacity is invisible from the sea. A visitor entering the commercial harbour, which is separate, which connects to the military harbour through a channel, sees only commerce. The warships are hidden not because Carthage is ashamed of them, but because Carthage is ashamed of them, but because Carthage understands that the most effective power is power whose true extent is unknown. The commercial harbour is its own world. Ships from every coast of the known Mediterranean are here, from the Levant and from Iberia, from the Greek cities of Sicily and from the Atlantic coast of what will one day be called Morocco. Carthaginian merchants are already trading beyond the Pillars of Hercules, beyond what the Greeks called the edge of the world, reaching the tin mines of Britain, the gold coasts of West Africa, the amber routes of the Baltic. They are doing this not as adventurers but as businessmen. The records are kept. The accounts are settled. The routes are known and protected and passed from father to son with the same care that other civilizations pass down prayers. The city that grows around these harbours is cosmopolitan in the way that only genuinely commercial cities can be. Languages mix on its streets. Punic and Berber and Greek and the trade pigeons of a dozen other cultures. Religion absorbs and adapts. The gods of Tyre are here. Baal Hammon, Tanit, whose image appears on thousands of votive stelae, but so are the religious practices of the Berber peoples of the interior. The Greek traders who have established their own quarter, the Egyptians and the Sardinians and the Sicilians who come to do business and sometimes stay. Carthage is not tolerant of this diversity in any ideological sense. It is simply too commercially sophisticated to be threatened by it. Different peoples bring different knowledge. Different knowledge makes the system stronger. The population, at its height, is somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 people. This makes Carthage one of the largest cities in the ancient world, comparable to Rome itself in the centuries before the Punic Wars. The streets are paved. The buildings are multi-storied. Ancient sources describe apartment buildings of 6 stories, an engineering achievement that speaks to both the density of the population and the sophistication of Carthaginian construction. The city has fresh water brought by aqueduct and stored in underground cisterns. It has public spaces and private ones. It has neighborhoods differentiated by function and by the particular character of the people who inhabit them. And then there is the land beyond the walls, the hinterland of Carthage, the rich agricultural territory of what is now Tunisia. The Capon Peninsula, the Megiddo Valley, is not naturally the most forgiving agricultural environment the ancient world has to offer. The rainfall is irregular. The summers are long and dry. The soils vary from the deep alluvial richness of the river valleys to the thin, rocky hillside terrain that punishes careless cultivation. It is not an environment that rewards the farmer who simply plants and hopes. It rewards the farmer who watches, who records, who adjusts, who understands that the land will yield its secrets only to those patient enough to ask the right questions over a long enough period of time. Carthaginian farmers are those people. Over centuries, across generations of careful empirical observation, they develop something that in a later age would be called agronomy. They learn which crops restore what the previous season has taken from the soil. They learn how to amend the soil itself, what it needs, what it cannot absorb, how it responds to different treatments in different seasons. They develop irrigation systems calibrated to the particular behavior of North African rainfall, storing water in the wet months against the certainty of the dry ones. They cultivate the olive with a precision that produces yields that astonish their neighbors and enrich their merchants. The olive is not simply a crop to them. It is a long-term investment, a multi-generational commitment, because an olive tree planted today will not reach full production for decades. and only a civilization confident in its own continuity plants trees whose fruit its grandchildren will harvest. This confidence is itself a kind of knowledge. It is the knowledge of a people who believe they will still be here. The man whose name survives from this tradition is Mago, a Carthaginian writer who compiles the accumulated agricultural wisdom of his civilization into a work of 28 books, a systematic, comprehensive treatment of farming that the Roman Senate will, after the destruction of Carthage, specifically commission to be translated into Latin. The Romans recognize what they are dealing with. They understand that these 28 books represent something more than agricultural advice. They represent the distilled empirical intelligence of a civilization that has spent 6 centuries learning, in the most practical possible way, how to make the North African soil do what it is capable of doing. But Mago's 28 books are only a fraction of what the library holds. 500,000 volumes. The number requires a moment of stillness. In a world where every book is hand-copied, where every scroll represents hours of scribal labor, 500,000 volumes is an act of civilizational will. This is not a collection assembled casually or accidentally. It is the result of generations of deliberate, sustained effort to preserve and organize what a civilization knows about mathematics, about astronomy, about medicine, about philosophy, about the movement of stars and the behavior of tides, and the particular requirements of soil that has been farmed for 200 years without a fallow season. It is the memory of how things work. It is the record of what has been tried, and what has failed, and what has succeeded and why. It is, in every meaningful sense, a civilization's memory of how to feed itself, and it is about to become the most consequential thing Rome will ever burn. The salt grass still grows on the hillside above the bay. The light still turns the sea to hammered bronze in the late afternoon. The ships still come and go from the commercial harbor, their captains recording in careful Punic script the weight of the cargo in the terms of the transaction and the name of the port of origin. The farmers are still in the fields of the Medjeda Valley, still watching the soil, still noting what they observe, still adding to the accumulated body of knowledge that fills those 500,000 scrolls. They do not know what is coming. How could they? They have been here for 6 centuries. They have outlasted empires before. They have survived the First Punic War and the humiliation that followed and the long grinding burden of the reparations, and they are slowly, carefully, stubbornly rebuilding. Their merchants are trading again. Their fields are producing again. Their merchants are trading again. Their fields are producing again. Their library is intact. This is, it will turn out, precisely the problem. In 264 BCE, a dispute over a Sicilian city called Messana, a dispute that neither Rome nor Carthage had planned, that arose from the opportunistic maneuvering of a mercenary band called the Mamertines that was in its origins almost comically small relative to its consequences, pulled the 2 greatest powers of the Western Mediterranean into a war that neither was fully prepared to fight and nay, dare could afford to lose. The Mamertines are not heroes. They are not even interesting men. Not in the way that history usually requires its catalysts to be interesting. They are former soldiers of fortune, companion mercenaries who had seized the city of Messana by violence a generation earlier, slaughtering its male population and taking its women, and who now find themselves squeezed between Carthaginian pressure from the west and the expanding Syracusan kingdom to the south. They appeal first to Carthage, then to Rome, playing one power against the other with the cheerful cynicism of men who have never had anything to lose. Rome's Senate debates the question with what the historical record suggests is genuine embarrassment. These are not men worth going to war for. The Mamertines are the kind of ally that makes a civilization look smaller for having them. And yet Sicily sits at the center of the Mediterranean like a hinge, and Carthage has been pressing its interests there for a century. And the Roman assembly votes, narrowly, to send a garrison. It is not a declaration of war. It is not even, in the minds of the men who authorize it, the beginning of something. It is a small, pragmatic, slightly shameful decision made by men who tell themselves they are simply managing a border problem. Carthage, which has its own garrison already positioned in Messana by the time the Roman force arrives, does not see it that way. What follows is the collision of two powers who had previously managed their ambitions with enough geographic distance to avoid direct confrontation. Their treaty relations had been correct if not warm. Trade had flowed. Spheres of influence had been tacitly acknowledged. Now, suddenly, both stand on the same small piece of Sicilian rock, and the fiction of coexistence is no longer available. A Carthaginian commander is seized. The Roman garrison takes the city, and a war that neither civilization had planned finds itself already in progress before either has fully decided to begin it. Rome has never built a serious navy. This is not an oversight. It is a reflection of Rome's self-understanding as a land power. A civilization whose genius runs through its legions and its roads and its capacity to hold ground. The sea is someone else's domain, and for most of Rome's history, that arrangement has been entirely satisfactory. Carthage, by contrast, has been a naval power for centuries. Its quinquermes are the most sophisticated warships in the Mediterranean. Its sailors have generations of accumulated knowledge about currents, weather, and the particular violence that the sea between Sicily and Africa is capable of producing. The asymmetry at the start is almost absurd. What Rome does in response to this asymmetry is one of the more remarkable things in the ancient record. And it is remarkable not because it is elegant, but because it is so nakedly, stubbornly determined. The Romans find a wrecked Carthaginian warship on a beach. They take it apart. They study it. They copy it. And while they are building their fleet, building it quickly, building it from a template they have never used before, building it with timber they are cutting for the first time for this purpose. They train their rowers on benches constructed on dry land, rows of men sitting on wooden frames in the Italian countryside, pulling on oars that touch nothing, learning the rhythm of a sea they have not yet reached. It is not graceful. It is not sophisticated. It is a civilization treating catastrophic ignorance as a logistical problem to be solved by next season. And it works, and that working is a portrait of something Carthage has not yet learned to fear. The early years of the war produce victories and defeats on both sides, and the war settles into the grinding, mutual education that first wars between great powers always become. Carthage's professional armies are skilled. Their commanders are experienced. On land, in the Sicilian interior, they hold their positions with the competence of men who have been fighting this kind of war for a long time. At sea, they are faster and more practiced than the Roman fleets that oppose them. And for a time, this seems like it ought to matter decisively. Rome compensates for its naval inexperience with a device called the corvus, a boarding bridge with an iron spike that drops onto an enemy deck and holds the ships together, turning a naval engagement into something closer to a land battle, which is the only kind of battle Rome is certain it knows how to win. At Mylae in 260 BCE, the Roman commander Gaius Duilius uses this contraption to defeat a Carthaginian fleet in what is technically a naval engagement but functions, in practice, as a series of land battles conducted on water. It is not beautiful. It is effective. But the sea does not care about effectiveness. The sea has its own requirements, and Rome has not yet learned to meet them. In 255 BCE, returning from an expedition to North Africa, an expedition that had briefly, terrifyingly brought the war to Carthage's own doorstep, before Carthaginian resistance and a mercenary commander named Xanthippus ended the Roman advance, a Roman fleet of perhaps 250 ships encounters a storm off the coast of Camarina. The numbers that come down to us are staggering and should be allowed to land with full weight before the narration moves past them. Perhaps 100,000 men. Perhaps more. Lost in an afternoon, not to Carthaginian swords, but to weather that an experienced Mediterranean sailor might have read and avoided. The ships are too heavily laden. The season is wrong. The commanders, despite warnings, press on. The sea takes them. It is the kind of loss that ends most wars. It is the kind of loss after which a civilization sits down and recalculates, and the recalculation concludes that the cost has exceeded any possible prize, and ambassadors are sent, and terms are negotiated, and the war stops. Carthage, watching from across the water, may have expected exactly this. What it receives instead is Rome building more ships. The rhythm is almost mechanical in its refusal of ordinary human response to catastrophe, loss and replacement, storm and reconstruction, defeat and a revised tactical approach, applied with the same institutional stubbornness that produced the defeat in the first place. Carthage has never priced this correctly. Carthage has no framework for an enemy that treats each disaster not as a signal to reconsider, but as data for the next attempt. The war continues for 23 years. 23 years of Sicilian campaigning, of sieges and naval engagements, and the slow, ruinous consumption of treasury and manpower on both sides. Neither civilization breaks cleanly. Both discover that the other is harder to kill than anticipated. What the war reveals, slowly, in the way that only sustained conflict reveals the deep character of institutions, is something about the fundamental difference in how these two civilizations relate to loss. Carthage fights professionally. It hires well. It manages its military commitments with the rational efficiency of a commercial power that understands war as a cost-benefit calculation. When the calculation tips against further expenditure, the rational response is to stop. This is not cowardice. It is the logic of a civilization built around the intelligent management of resources, and for most of Carthage's history, it has served perfectly well. Rome fights differently. Rome fights as though defeat were a temporary technical condition rather than a meaningful verdict. There is something almost inhuman in it, something that its enemies consistently underestimate, because it does not look like strength in any form they recognize. It looks from the outside like an inability to understand when one has lost, but it is not that. It is a different relationship with institutional death, the capacity to absorb catastrophic loss, to grieve it, to record it, and then to continue as though the continuation were simply the next logical step. By 241 BCE, both sides are exhausted in ways that go beyond the counting of ships and soldiers. Carthage's treasury has been strained by decades of mercenary payments and Sicilian commitments. Rome has lost more men at sea to weather than it has to Carthaginian swords, and the Italian allies who supply the legions are beginning to feel the weight of a war that has consumed a generation. The final naval engagement at the Aegates Islands goes to Rome, and with it goes Carthage's will to continue. The peace treaty of 241 BCE is signed by exhausted men who want to stop dying, and it accomplishes that limited objective with reasonable efficiency. Sicily becomes, in effect, Rome's first overseas province. Carthage pays an indemnity. The terms are not gentle, but they are survivable, and survival is what Carthage's negotiators are there to secure. What the treaty cannot accomplish is the erasure of what both sides now know about each other, that the other is harder to kill than expected, more capable than anticipated, and more dangerous alive than any previous enemy had been. The wound is dressed but not healed. Something has shifted in the ancient world's center of gravity, and everyone who was present for the shifting can feel it, even if no one yet has the language to name what it means. In Carthage, a general named Hamilcar Barca is watching his city sign away territory he believes could have been held. He has been fighting in Sicily since 247 BCE, conducting a guerrilla campaign from the heights of Mount Eryx with a skill and a tenacity that the war's larger narrative has not fully rewarded. He has not been defeated in the field. He has held his positions. He has done, by any military accounting, everything that could be asked of a commander in a deteriorating strategic situation. And now he stands and watches diplomats undo what soldiers preserved. And the thing moving through him in that moment is not grief exactly, and it is not rage exactly, but it is something that will not dissolve with the signing of documents. He is raising a son. The boy is perhaps 6 years old, perhaps 7. His name is Hannibal. The accounts that survive, and they are fragmentary, pass through layers of Roman and Greek transmission that have their own interests in the telling. Describe a moment, years later, when the boy asks to accompany his father on a military expedition, and Hamilcar takes the boy to an altar and asks him to swear an oath. The oath, as it has come down to us, is an oath of eternal enmity toward Rome. Hamilcar, the accounts say, had already sworn it himself. He is now asking his son to carry it forward. We cannot know what passes between a father and a boy at an altar in the years after a war that ended badly. We cannot know what Hamilcar says in the privacy of his own household, what lessons he draws from 23 years of conflict, what conclusions he has reached about the civilization that has just extracted these terms from his city. We know only what his son will do 2 decades later, and what that son will cost Rome, and how close the thing will come to ending everything. The peace treaty is signed. The men who signed it believe, or tell themselves they believe, that the matter is settled. In Carthage, a father and a boy stand together, and something is being passed between them, something that no treaty has reached, something that no indemnity has addressed, something that lives in the space between a defeat that was not a defeat and a humiliation that was close enough that a man of Hamilcar Barca's particular nature cannot set it down and walk away. The narration does not name what Hamilcar is building. It does not need to. The silence is enough. The silence, and the boy, and the altar, and the thing being passed between them in the long quiet after the war. The boy is 29 years old. He has been preparing for this his entire life, and still the mountains nearly kill him. In the winter of 218 BCE, Hannibal Barca leads an army of approximately 40,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants across the Pyrenees, through the long throat of southern Gaul, and into the Alps at the moment of year when the Alps are most completely themselves, which is to say, most completely indifferent to human ambition, most completely committed to the proposition that the living do not belong here, that warmth and intention and the elaborate organizational machinery of a military campaign are all, in the end, just more things that the cold will take from you. The passes are ice. The trails are narrow shelves above nothing. The elephants, those magnificent, terrifying creatures that Hannibal has carried from Africa like a proof of concept, like a statement about what a Carthaginian army is capable of imagining. The elephants slide and bellow and in some cases go over the edge and are simply gone, swallowed by altitude. Soldiers who have marched from Iberia through Gaul and believe themselves hardened beyond further hardening discover that they are not. The cold teaches them this personally. Men fall asleep and do not wake. Men lose fingers and toes to frostbite and march on without them, because the alternative is to stop, and to stop in the Alps in winter is to become part of the mountain. Roughly half of Hannibal's force does not survive the crossing. This is the number that must be held alongside everything else. Half. 20,000 men who began the Alpine passage do not complete it. They are in the snow somewhere, or in the crevasses, or scattered across the high meadows that will not thaw for months. The army that descends into the Po Valley of northern Italy is a diminished thing, exhausted and frostbitten and reduced, and it should, by any reasonable military calculation, be a broken thing. It should be finished before it has properly begun. It is not finished. It is pointing toward Rome. What emerges from the Alps is something that the cold and the attrition have not weakened so much as distilled. What is left is the irreducible core of an army built by a man who has been thinking about this campaign since childhood. who carries in his bones the specific gravity of his father's oath, who understands, in a way that goes beyond tactics into something more like theology, that he is not merely fighting a war but completing an argument, that his civilization began and Rome interrupted. The men who survive the crossing are alive because they are exactly the soldiers Hannibal needs. The mountain has performed a selection that no general could have designed, and so Hannibal arrives in Italy exhausted, diminished, half destroyed, and still, somehow, lethal. Rome does not yet know this. Rome hears reports of an army in the north and dispatches forces to deal with it, the way a large and confident republic deals with problems at its edges, with the institutional assumption that the machinery of Roman military organization, which has proven itself sufficient against every previous challenge, will prove sufficient against this one too. The assumption is reasonable. It is also catastrophically wrong. The Trebia River runs cold in December. Hannibal understands cold rivers. He understands them the way a man understands the tools he has chosen to use, not with admiration but with precision. He stations cavalry and infantry in the reeds and scrub on the Roman flank, hidden, patient, waiting. Then he sends his Numidian horsemen to taunt the Roman camp at dawn, to needle and provoke, to make the Roman commander Sempronius Longus feel the particular impatience that pride manufactures in men who believe they cannot lose. Sempronius takes the bait. He sends his men across the Trebia in winter water up to their chests, and they arrive on the far bank, wet and cold and hungry. He has not allowed them to eat. And then Hannibal's hidden force comes out of the reeds, and what follows is not a battle in any sense that the Romans have prepared for. It is a destruction. It is methodical and cold-blooded, and almost geometric in its precision. And when it is over, an army is gone. Shock is the word. But shock does not quite contain it. What Rome feels after Trebia is something closer to the disorientation of a man who has walked a road 1,000 times and one morning finds it rearranged. The road was here. The road was always here. And now it is not. Lake Trasimene is stranger still. It is June of 217 BCE. The morning fog sits heavy on the water and the hills above it, and Hannibal has arranged his entire army in the high ground along the northern shore of the lake, hidden in the mist, positioned along 4 miles of road where the Roman column of Gaius Flaminius must pass. Flaminius knows Hannibal is somewhere ahead. He does not know that somewhere ahead means directly above him, surrounding him, waiting. The column marches into the fog. The attack comes from 3 sides simultaneously. There is no time to form a battle line. There is barely time to understand what is happening. 30,000 Roman soldiers die in under 3 hours, many of them in the lake itself, driven into the water by the pressure of men who cannot see and cannot turn and cannot do anything except be pushed forward into the cold. Flaminius dies in the fighting. The column does not retreat. It ceases to exist. 3 hours, 30,000 men in fog along a lake, in a space that Hannibal has turned into something that functions less like a battlefield than like a closing hand. Rome receives the news and the city goes quiet, in a way that cities go quiet when the thing they feared but could not name has finally been named. The Roman historian will record that when the praetor stood in the forum and told the crowd what had happened at Trasimene, he said only, "We have been defeated in a great battle." No elaboration, no tactical explanation, just that. The defeat sits in the forum like a stone, and the people stand around it and do not speak. But Trasimene is not Cannae. Trasimene is the prelude. Cannae is August 2nd, 216 BCE, and it is the chapter's center of gravity, and it deserves to be approached slowly, the way you approach something that has not yet finished being terrible. Rome has rebuilt its army. Rome has done what Rome does, which is to apply organizational will to disaster and emerge from the other side with more soldiers than it had before. The new consular army is enormous, perhaps 80,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, the largest force Rome has ever put in the field. The logic is straightforward and understandable. If the previous armies were too small to defeat Hannibal, a larger army will not be. The logic is wrong, but it is the kind of wrong that only becomes visible afterward, when the thing it failed to account for has already happened. Hannibal has 50,000 men. He is outnumbered. He places his weakest troops, the Gauls and Iberians, at the center of his line, bowed forward toward the Romans. His best troops, his African veterans, wait on the flanks. The battle begins with the Roman legions pushing forward against the center, which is exactly what Hannibal needs them to do. The center bends. It bends further. It bows backward under Roman pressure like a door giving way, and the Romans pour forward into the space it creates, pressing tighter together as the flanks close around them, pressing tighter still as the African infantry pivots inward from both sides and the Carthaginian cavalry seals the rear, and then the 80,000 soldiers of Rome's greatest army are standing in a space so compressed the Romans cannot raise their shields, cannot swing their swords, cannot do anything except die against each other in the pressure of their own formation. 50,000 Roman dead, some accounts say 70,000, in a single afternoon. The numbers do not become real by repetition. They become real only slowly, the way a very large wound becomes real. First the shock, then the sensation, then the understanding of what has been lost. 2 consuls, 80 senators, perhaps a third of the Roman Senate, dead in a field in Apulia by evening. The rings of the dead are collected and sent to Carthage in a bushel basket. A bushel basket. The Carthaginian Senate pours them onto the floor and counts them and understands that something has happened in Italy that changes the arithmetic of the ancient world. In Rome, the Senate debates evacuation to Sicily. Mothers in the city stand at their doors in the dark and listen. They do not know what they are listening for. They know only that the dark feels different now, that the sounds of the city, the animals, the watchmen, the ordinary texture of a night in a large and confident republic have acquired an undertone of something that was not there before. The city is the same city. The streets are the same streets, and yet something has been subtracted from the world that cannot be replaced by military reorganization, or senatorial resolution, or any of the other instruments a civilization reaches for when it feels itself coming apart. What breaks at Cannae is not just an army. It is an assumption, the foundational Roman assumption that Roman soil is Roman, that the peninsula is a sanctuary, that the legions stand between the city and whatever the world might send against it. That assumption does not survive the afternoon of August 2nd, 216 BCE. It is replaced by something harder and colder and far more dangerous. Not fear, exactly. Fear implies the possibility of relief. What replaces the assumption is something more permanent. A knowledge of what the world is capable of what an enemy who has been given sufficient reason can do on an August afternoon with 50,000 men and a geometric imagination. Rome does not name what this knowledge will eventually produce. It does not need to. The knowledge simply takes root in the institutional soil of the Republic and waits. Into this moment steps Quintus Fabius Maximus, and he brings with him an idea so counterintuitive, so offensive to Roman military culture, so deeply incompatible with the Roman understanding of what it means to be Rome, that it will earn him a nickname that is meant as an insult and will become, over time, a kind of epitaph for the strategy that saved a civilization. They call him the Delayer. Fabius understands something that the dead consuls did not. He understands that Hannibal cannot be beaten by meeting him in the field. He understands that Hannibal's genius is precisely the kind of genius that feeds on direct engagement, that every time Rome lines up its legions and walks toward the Carthaginian line, it is handing Hannibal the instrument of its own destruction. The way to survive Hannibal is not to fight him, it is to refuse him, to shadow his army through the hills of Italy, to cut off foraging parties, to deny him the decisive victory that would bring Rome's Italian allies over to Carthage in sufficient numbers to end the war, to starve him slowly of reinforcements and supplies and the forward momentum that his campaign requires. It is not glorious. It is not the kind of strategy that gets statues built. It is the strategy of a man who has looked at the situation with cold clarity and decided that survival matters more than dignity, that the Republic still standing in 10 years matters more than the Republic's pride intact today. Hannibal rampages through southern Italy. He burns and plunders and demonstrates repeatedly that he can go where he wishes and do what he wishes, and that no Roman force will meet him in open battle. He is trying to break the loyalty of Rome's Italian allies, trying to show them that Rome cannot protect them, that the future belongs to Carthage, and the wise choice is to choose it now. Some cities do defect. Capua, the second city of Italy, opens its gates to Hannibal in 216 BCE. But the defections are not enough. The decisive mass movement does not come. Fabius's strategy holds the alliance together through the long, grinding, humiliating years of Hannibal's occupation, and slowly, very slowly, the arithmetic begins to shift. 15 years. Hannibal is in Italy for 15 years, undefeated in the field. This fact must be allowed to stand without commentary for a moment. He does not lose. He is never beaten in a pitched battle on Italian soil. He wins at Trebia and Trasimene and Cannae, and in a dozen smaller engagements. And he remains a lethal presence in the south of the peninsula until 203 BCE, when a Roman army under Scipio Africanus lands in North Africa and threatens Carthage itself, and the Carthaginian Senate recalls him. He does not leave because Rome defeated him. He leaves because Rome found a way to make his victory in Italy irrelevant by threatening everything he was fighting to protect. He is recalled, not beaten, recalled. The distinction matters enormously, and Rome knows it matters, and the knowledge sits in the institutional memory of the Republic like a splinter that cannot be worked free. Hannibal left Italy undefeated, and Carthage still stands, and the fields of North Africa are still fertile, and the merchants of Carthage are already, even in the humiliation of the peace terms, beginning to recover. Scipio defeats Hannibal at Zama in 202 BCE, and the Second Punic War ends, and Rome stands over its enemy with all the instruments of final decision in its hands, and Rome does not use them. Carthage is stripped of its fleet and its empire and forced to pay enormous reparations. But it lives. Its walls still stand. Its harbors still function. Its farmers still work the deep North African soil that has fed civilizations for centuries. Its library still holds its scrolls, and somewhere in the Roman Senate, in the cold institutional memory of men who were children during the years when Carthaginian trumpets might have been audible in the dark, the knowledge that Fabius planted, the knowledge of what survival costs, of what near extinction feels like from the inside. That knowledge is hardening into something that is no longer merely strategic. It is becoming a conviction, a reflex, a certainty so deep it has ceased to feel like a decision and begun to feel like a fact of nature. Carthage survived. Carthage is recovering. Carthage still knows what it knows, still grows what it grows, still understands the deep science of making arid land bloom, and no treaty can take that from it. And in the Forum, in the corridors of the Senate, in the long memory of a republic that came within a single afternoon of ceasing to exist, a man is preparing to stand up and say what that knowledge requires. He is not yet at the podium, but he is coming, and he carries figs. The man who would eventually make Carthage's destruction politically inevitable was not a general. He was a farmer's son from the Sabine Hills who rose through Roman public life on the strength of a voice like a millstone and a moral authority so aggressively performed that it became, over decades, indistinguishable from the genuine article. And his name was Marcus Porcius Cato, and he had fought against Hannibal as a young soldier, and he had never forgotten what it felt like to watch Rome, nay, early die. He is old now. That matters. He is old in the way that certain men become old, not diminished but concentrated, the way metal is concentrated in a forge. Every impurity burned away until what remains is harder than what you started with. He walks through the forum with the body of a man who has worked land with his own hands, who has stood in shield walls and held position, who has eaten the same food as his soldiers and ploughed the same furrows as his tenants, and written, in plain Latin, without ornament or apology, about how to press olives and when to plant turnips, and what a Roman man owes to the soil that made him. He is not performing simplicity. He is simplicity, or he has become it so completely that the distinction no longer applies. He is 80 years old, roughly, in 153 BCE, when he joins a Roman diplomatic mission to Carthage. He has been making noise about the Carthaginian question for years, decades, even. But the noise has been the noise of a hawk among doves. Heard and noted and set aside, the Senate has other concerns. The Mediterranean is large. Carthage is paying its reparations. The Second Punic War is 50 years gone. Hannibal is dead, by his own hand, in exile in Bithynia, rather than be handed over to Rome, which is the kind of ending that tells you something about the man, but also something about the empire that hunted him. The wound, the Senate believes, has healed. Cato does not believe this. Cato has never believed this. And now, in his 80th year, on a diplomatic errand to the very city that haunts him, he is about to see why. What he finds there breaks something open in him, not because it is frightening in the way that armies are frightening, not because Carthage is rearming or conspiring or massing troops on a border. What Cato finds in Carthage in 153 BCE is something far more disturbing to a man of his particular intelligence. He finds prosperity. He finds competence. He finds a city that has absorbed the worst Rome could do to it, the loss of its fleet, the loss of its empire, the loss of its military capacity, the grinding weight of 50 years of reparations, and has responded by doing the one thing Rome forgot to forbid. It has continued to think. The farms outside Carthage are producing. The soil, that ancient North African soil that Carthaginian agronomists have been studying and amending and coaxing for generations, is yielding what it has always yielded for people who understand it. The harbors are busy, not with warships, those are gone, but with merchant vessels, because commerce does not require a navy when you have the knowledge to produce things other people want. The library stands, 500,000 volumes, the accumulated practical intelligence of 6 centuries, still there, still being read, still being added to by scholars who have not stopped working simply because their city lost a war. The reparations, Cato calculates, will be paid off within a few years. And when they are, Carthage will owe Rome nothing, not money, not deference, not even the formal acknowledgement of subordination that debt enforces. It will simply be free and prosperous and in possession of everything it has always known. Cato stands in that city and understands something that changes the rest of his life. He understands that Carthage was never primarily a military power. The army was real. Hannibal was real. God knows Hannibal was real. But the army was always the instrument of something deeper. The real power of Carthage is the knowledge that built it. The agricultural science, the commercial intelligence, the astronomical precision that made its navigators the finest in the Mediterranean, the practical engineering that turned a North African headland into the most sophisticated harbor system the ancient world has ever produced. These things did not require Hannibal to exist. They did not require a fleet. They required only that the city survive. and the city is surviving, and it is doing so with a quiet, relentless, infuriating competence that Cato recognizes immediately as the most dangerous thing he has ever seen. Because here is what Cato knows, and what his 80 years of Roman public life have taught him, with a clarity that younger men cannot yet access. Power that is rooted in knowledge does not die when you defeat it in battle. It waits, it rebuilds, it compounds, the way good soil compounds when you know how to tend it, the way a library compounds when scholars keep adding to it. A military threat you can destroy by destroying the army. A knowledge threat you cannot destroy by any means, short of destroying the knowledge itself. And Cato, standing in Carthage in 153 BCE, surrounded by evidence of a civilization that has survived everything Rome has done to it and is quietly, methodically recovering its strength, arrives at the conclusion that will define the last years of his life and the first years of Carthage's death. It is not enough to have defeated Carthage's. It will never be enough to have defeated Carthage. The only way to make Rome safe is to ensure that Carthage cannot recover. Not because its army might reassemble, but because its knowledge might. And knowledge, once it exists, can only be destroyed by destroying the vessel that contains it. He comes home carrying figs. This is the detail that history preserves, and it deserves the plainness with which it should be told. Cato brings figs from Carthage to the Roman Senate. He holds them up. He says, "Look how fresh they are. 3 days from the tree, 3 days sailing. That is how close Carthage is. That is how quickly it grows what it grows." And in that gesture, a farmer's gesture, a practical man's gesture, the kind of evidence that a man who has spent his life working soil understands instinctively, Cato compresses his entire argument into something the Senate can hold in its hand and smell. He does not need to say, "The agricultural knowledge that produced this fig is more dangerous than any army." He does not need to say, "The city that grew this fruit is recovering faster than Rome is comfortable admitting." He does not need to say any of it. The fig says it. The 3 days say it. The freshness of the thing, the plump and ordinary abundance of it, sitting in an old soldier's hand in the Roman Senate that says everything. And then he speaks. He speaks in the voice that has been described by everyone who heard it as something between a natural force and a judicial verdict. A voice that does not persuade so much as it announces conclusions that were always going to be true. He has been making this speech, in one form or another, for years. But now he makes it with the authority of a man who has seen the thing himself, who has stood in the city and looked at the farms and walked past the library and understood, with the full weight of his 80 years, what he is looking at. He ends the speech, as he ends every speech, on every subject, before this body, from this point forward, until his death, with 5 words. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed, not weakened, not constrained, not monitored or managed or kept at a safe distance by the careful maintenance of treaty obligations. Destroyed. The word in Latin is final, in a way the translation softens, delenda. It must be demolished. It must be made to not exist. The verb carries in its bones the sense of an obligation, a thing that must be done because it is necessary, because the alternative is unthinkable, because there is no other conclusion available to a rational mind that has examined the evidence and followed the argument to its end. He says it after speeches about grain prices. He says it after speeches about road construction and judicial appointments and the proper conduct of Roman magistrates in the provinces. He says it after speeches that have nothing to do with Carthage and everything to do with the daily administration of a republic that has many concerns, of which Carthage is only one. He says it every time at the end, like a man who has arrived at a truth so fundamental that it belongs at the conclusion of every conversation, the way a prayer belongs at the end of every meal. Not because it is relevant to what was just discussed, but because it is relevant to everything, because it is the ground condition beneath all other conditions, because until it is resolved, nothing else. E is fully resolved. His colleagues find it maddening. Some find it absurd. A few find it visionary. All of them, eventually, find it inescapable, because Cato has understood something about political argument that most men understand only in theory. He has understood that repetition is not redundancy. Repetition is pressure. Repetition is the slow accumulation of a weight that the listener cannot set down, cannot argue against directly, cannot dismiss without seeming to dismiss the man who carries it, and Cato is not a man Rome can afford to dismiss. He is the conscience of the Republic. He is the Sabine farmer, made senator, made living embodiment of Roman virtue, and when a man like that says over and over, in a voice like a millstone, that a thing must be done, eventually the thing gets done. But the genius of Cato's argument, and the reason it works where purely military arguments might not have, is that it is not really about military threat at all. It is about the nature of knowledge as power. Cato understands with a cold clarity that his contemporaries may not fully appreciate, that a civilization which has learned how to make arid land bloom, how to rotate crops across generations, how to build harbors and calculate astronomical tables and preserve the practical science of survival, that such a civilization cannot be made safe by defeating it in battle. It can only be made safe by ensuring that the knowledge itself no longer exists. And this is where Hamilcar Barca's lesson, planted a generation earlier in the heart of a child who would grow into the most dangerous soldier Rome ever faced, finds its dark echo in a different kind of inheritance. Hamilcar made Hannibal swear an oath of hatred before he would take him to Spain. He understood that hatred, properly cultivated, properly directed, becomes a force that outlasts the man who plants it. He understood that what you teach a child in the marrow of their formation is what they carry into every battlefield, every calculation, every sleepless night in a camp in Italy, listening to the fires of a republic they have nearly broken. Hannibal carried that lesson for 15 years on Italian soil, through Trebia and Trasimene and the catastrophic afternoon at Cannae, where 70,000 Romans died, and the Senate debated whether the city itself should be abandoned. He carried it until he was recalled, until Zama, until defeat, and still he carried it, into exile, into the courts of Eastern kings, into the final corner where the only choice left was the poison he kept ready for exactly this moment. Cato carries his own lesson, not hatred, or not only hatred, something colder, something that has passed through hatred and come out the other side into a kind of terrible intellectual clarity. He was a young soldier when Hannibal was in Italy. He felt what it felt like to live inside the possibility of Rome's extinction, and he has spent 60 years thinking about what that feeling means, what it requires, what a man owes to a republic that nearly ceased to exist and that will, if the lesson is not learned, face the same threat again. Not from Hannibal, Hannibal is dead, but from the civilization that made Hannibal possible, the civilization that is even now, in its reduced and treaty-bound condition, quietly demonstrating that it has not forgotten how to be itself. What Cato is proposing, dressed in the language of Roman security, is something that has no precedent in the ancient world, not the conquest of a civilization, but its epistemic erasure, the deliberate destruction not merely of a city, but of everything a city knows. The agricultural library, the astronomical tables, the crop rotation treatises and the harbor engineering manuals, and the 500,000 volumes of accumulated practical intelligence that represent, more than any army, more than any fleet, the true power of the civilization that produced Hannibal and fed his campaign and believed, for 15 years, that it might actually win. Cato does not say this in the Senate. He does not need to. He holds up a fig, and he says 5 words, and he lets the logic do what logic does when it is clear enough, and man speaking it is credible enough, and the fear beneath it is real enough and old enough and has been waiting long enough for someone to give it a name. Carthago delenda est, not a threat, not a proposal, a conclusion. the conclusion of a man who has followed the argument to its end and found waiting there, at the bottom of it, the only answer that satisfies, the answer that will not be questioned again until the smoke is already rising over the African coast, and a general named Scipio is standing in the ruins of a library, watching everything a civilization ever knew turn to ash above the sea. By 150 BCE, Cato's argument has won, though the Senate has not yet formally voted on what winning will mean in practice, because the problem with destroying a city that has committed no recent aggression, paid its reparations in full, and scrupulously observed the terms of a peace treaty for more than 50 years, is that even Rome, which has few illusions about the relationship between power and law, requires some formal justification that can be written into the historical record without causing the allies and client states who watch Rome's behavior to conclude that treaty compliance offers no protection whatsoever. This is the particular difficulty of the trap. It must look like justice. It must have the architecture of cause and effect, of provocation and response, of a sovereign power reluctantly compelled by circumstances to act. The men who design it are not stupid. They are, in fact, among the most sophisticated legal and political minds of the ancient world, and they understand with perfect clarity that what they are constructing is a fiction, and they build it anyway. Carefully, over years, with the patience of engineers who know that the structure must bear a great deal of weight. The instrument they choose is Massinissa. He is old now, in 150 BCE. He is in his 80s, an extraordinary age for any man in any era, and he has spent 5 decades accumulating exactly what Rome promised him after Zama: territory, security, and the quiet permission to take more of both whenever the opportunity presents itself. He is the king of Numidia, Rome's most reliable client in North Africa, and his relationship with Rome is one of the ancient world's most precisely calibrated arrangements. He does not need to be told what is wanted from him. He has always known. A client king who has survived 80 years understands the grammar of imperial expectation without being taught it. What Massinissa has been doing for 50 years, in small increments that never quite rise to the level of formal crisis, is eating Carthage's agricultural hinterland. A valley here, a watershed there, fertile bottomland along a river that Carthaginian farmers have cultivated for generations, land whose soil composition is understood in texts that sit in the Great Library, land whose productivity is the result not of nature alone, but of centuries of accumulated human knowledge applied with patience and care. Each encroachment is modest, each is accompanied by some legal argument, some claim of ancestral right, some interpretation of a boundary that Rome, when appealed to, consistently rules in Massinissa's favor, or delays ruling on at all, which amounts to the same thing. Carthage appeals. Again and again, Carthage appeals. This is the detail that must be held carefully because it reveals something essential about what is happening. Carthage believes the rules are real. This is not naivety. It is the rational position of a civilization that has honored every term of a punishing peace for half a century, that has paid every installment of its reparations, that has built its recovery on commerce and agriculture rather than military power, that has done, in other words, precisely what a defeated power is supposed to do. When Carthage sends delegations to Rome to appeal Massinissa's encroachments, those delegations are not performing helplessness. They genuinely believe that the treaty means what it says, that Rome's arbitration process is a process rather than a theater, that the system can be worked because the system is real. Rome's Senate listens to each delegation with the formal courtesy that the occasion requires. It deliberates, it sends commissions to investigate. The commissions return. The Senate deliberates again, and then it either rules in Massinissa's favor or declines to rule at all. And the land that Carthaginian farmers have worked for generations passes into Numidian hands, and with it passes something that no legal ruling can quantify. The living knowledge of how to work that specific land, the relationship between those farmers and that soil, the practical application of everything the libraries agree, cultural texts describe in theory. This is not incidental. This is the design. Cato has understood it for years. He has stood in the Senate holding his North African figs, letting the moisture of them speak for itself, and what he has been saying beneath the words, beneath the 5 words he always says, is this: Carthage's danger is not its army. Its army is gone. Its fleet is gone. Its fleet is gone. Its danger is precisely what cannot be taken by treaty or confiscated by commission. It is the knowledge, the agricultural intelligence encoded in those 500,000 volumes, yes, but also encoded in the hands and the practices of the farmers themselves, in the living transmission of technique from parent to child, in the relationship between a people and their land that persists as long as the people persist on the land. Every acre Massinissa takes is an acre from which that transmission is interrupted. Every valley absorbed into Numidia is a valley whose cultivation secrets are severed from the library that explains them. This is the slow confiscation of an epistemology. It proceeds farm by farm, appeal by appeal, ruling by ruling, and Carthage watches it happen with the specific desperation of people who keep reaching for a legal remedy that keeps dissolving in their hands. By 150 BCE, perhaps a third of Carthage's agricultural territory has passed to Numidia in this fashion. The reparations are nearly paid, 50 years of annual payments, and the end is in sight. And here is the thing that Rome's Senate has been watching with mounting anxiety: Carthage is recovering. Not militarily, not in any way that violates the treaty, but economically, commercially, agriculturally. The city is rebuilding its prosperity with the specific resilience of a civilization that knows how to make arid land bloom, that has the intellectual infrastructure to adapt and persist, that is, in other words, becoming again what it was before, the most consequential commercial intelligence in the Mediterranean world. This is what Cato has always said. This is what the figs mean. Not that Carthage is close in distance, though it is, but that Carthage is recovering in kind, becoming again the thing that Rome most fears, which is not an enemy army but a rival civilization, a different way of organizing human intelligence and human productivity, a proof that Rome's way is not the only way, and perhaps not even the best way. The trap is ready. It needs only a trigger. In 150 BCE, Massinissa makes his largest incursion yet. He takes the Emporia region, rich, agricultural, precisely the kind of territory whose loss Carthage cannot absorb and still remain viable as a commercial power. Carthage, which has exhausted every legal avenue, which has sent delegation after delegation to Rome and received in return only delay and adverse rulings, finally does the only thing left to do. It raises an army, not to attack Rome, not to threaten Italy, to defend what remains of its own territory against a client king who has been systematically consuming it for 50 years with Rome's explicit backing. The army is defeated by Massinissa. This is almost beside the point. What matters is that Carthage has technically violated the terms of its treaty, which forbid it from making war without Rome's permission. The violation is real in the narrowest legal sense. It is also the direct result of conditions that Rome has engineered over half a century. The Senate knows this. The men who now stand before it and demand action know this. They build their case on the violation anyway, with the confidence of people who understand that history is written by the survivors, and that the formal record will show cause and effect in the order that is most useful. Rome's demands arrive in sequence, and the sequence is the story. Each demand is met, each act of compliance is received and noted and followed immediately by the next demand, because compliance was never the point. The point is escalation, calibrated and inexorable, each step designed to appear reasonable in isolation while forming, in aggregate, a staircase descending toward a predetermined conclusion. First, Rome demands hostages, 300 children of Carthage's noble families. The Carthaginians, still believing, still, somehow, believing that the rules are real, comply. The children are sent to Rome. They are received. The next demand arrives. Then Rome demands weapons, all of them. The armories opened, the arsenals emptied. 200,000 sets of armor and 2,000 catapults loaded onto ships and carried away. The Carthaginians comply again, with a compliance that is now beginning to shade into something closer to dread. They have given their children. They have given their weapons. Surely now the demands will stop. Because what more can a disarmed city give? The fleet. Rome demands the fleet. It is handed over. There is a specific quality to the silence that follows the surrender of a fleet. A maritime civilization without ships is not merely weakened. It is severed from its own identity, from the commercial networks that are not merely its economy, but its reason for existing. Its way of being in the world. The Carthaginians who watch their ships sail away toward Rome are watching something more than military assets depart. They are watching the material form of what they are. And then the final demand comes. The Roman envoys deliver it in the spring of 149 BCE, and the words are precise and the meaning is unmistakable. Carthage is to abandon its coastal city entirely. The population is to relocate 60 miles inland, away from the sea. The city itself, its harbors, its libraries, its temples, its homes, its 5 centuries of accumulated physical culture, is to be demolished. 60 miles from the sea. For a maritime civilization, for the heirs of Phoenician sailors and traders whose entire existence has been organized around the water and the wind and the movement of goods across the Mediterranean world, 60 miles from the sea is not a relocation. It is a death sentence written in the language of urban planning. The Carthaginians know it. This is the moment the chapter must hold, because it is the moment when everything changes. Not in the world, not yet, but in the understanding of the people to whom it is happening. There is a precise instant when a people who have spent 3 years complying with every condition, surrendering every hostage and every weapon and every ship, finally understand that compliance was never the point, that the demands were not demands but stages, that the process they have been participating in was not a negotiation but a dismantling, conducted with their own cooperation, item by item, until nothing remained that could resist what was coming next. The Carthaginian Senate receives the final demand. The envoys wait for the answer. What happens in that room, in that moment, is not recorded in any text that survives. We have only the outcome, but the outcome tells us what the moment contained, because what follows is not the compliance that has characterized every previous response. What follows is something that the Romans, who have watched Carthage submit to one humiliation after another, do not expect. What follows is refusal. Carthage chose to fight. The decision is not militarily rational. The city has surrendered its weapons and its fleet, and Rome's army is already on African soil, camped outside the walls, waiting. The Carthaginians know what they are choosing. They Carthaginians know what they are choosing. They are not choosing victory. They are choosing something that cannot be taken from them by any demand, cannot be surrendered in any negotiation, cannot be written into any treaty. They are choosing to make Rome take what Rome will not be given. The workshops open. The temples become armories, gold jewelry, the accumulated wealth of merchants and families, the physical record of 5 centuries of commercial prosperity is melted down and poured into molds for new weapons. Women cut their hair, long hair gathered and braided and sacrificed with a practicality that is its own form of grief, to make bowstrings for catapults. The city that has spent 50 years demonstrating its peaceable compliance remakes itself, from its most intimate and personal resources outward, into something that will require Rome to earn what Rome has already decided to take. There is a word for what this is, and the word is not heroism, because heroism implies a possibility of triumph, a chance that the courage will be rewarded with survival. There is no such chance here. and the Carthaginians understand this with a clarity that is almost unbearable to contemplate across the distance of 21 centuries. What they are doing is not heroic in the triumphant sense. It is something quieter and more permanent. It is the refusal of a civilization to participate in its own erasure. It is the insistence, made in gold melted and haircut, and temples converted and walls manned by people who have no army, that whatever Rome takes from Carthage, Rome will have to take, that Carthage will not hand itself over in the orderly fashion that the demands have been designed to elicit. For 3 years, this disarmed city holds. 3 years against the most powerful military force in the Mediterranean world. 3 years of siege and assault, and the specific suffering of a population that knows it is fighting not for victory, but for the right to have fought. The walls hold longer than any Roman strategist has planned for. The resistance is improvised, desperate, brilliant in the way that people are brilliant when they are fighting not from strength, but from the absolute bottom of what they have left to give. What the jewelry and the hair and the 3 years of resistance tell us is not a military story. They tell us what Carthage understands itself to be, not a territory to be administered, not a population to be resettled, not a treaty obligation to be managed, but a civilization with a civilization's claim on its own continuity, its own knowledge, its own way of being in the world. The melted gold is a statement. The cut hair is a statement. The statement is this: we know what you are doing, and we know what we are, and we will not make it easy for you to pretend they are the same thing. Rome will breach the walls. The library will burn. The smoke will rise above the African coast, and a general will stand in the ruins and weep, and his companion will ask him why, and his answer will be the one answer that contains everything: that all cities fall, that all civilizations end, that what he is watching is not only Carthage's future, but Rome's own, written in the ash of the most complete act of deliberate forgetting the ancient world has ever witnessed. But that is not yet. That is still 3 years away. For now, there is only the city and the walls and the people inside them who have understood the trap and chosen, with full knowledge of the cost, to refuse it, who have taken what remains of their wealth and their beauty and their daily life and made of it the materials of resistance, who have looked at the demand that they walk 60 miles from the sea and carry nothing with them and said simply no. The trap has closed. Carthage knows it, and in knowing it and refusing it and fighting inside it with everything a disarmed city can make from gold and hair, and the will of people who understand that they are not managing their survival but asserting their identity. In all of this, Carthage does something that the Roman Senate, for all its legal sophistication and all its careful engineering of pretexts, has not accounted for. It makes itself unforgettable. And then the wall gives way. In the spring of 146 BCE, after 3 years of siege, in which Carthage has repeatedly and against all military logic refused to die, Scipio Aemilianus, 37 years old, the adopted grandson of the man who defeated Hannibal, a man who has read Greek philosophy and kept the historian Polybius at his side as a kind of intellectual conscience, finally finds the weakness in Carthage's harbour and drives his legions through it into a city that has been eating its leather and its dead for months and still will not surrender. He is not a cruel man. This matters, and it does not matter at all. He is a man produced by a system that has been moving toward this moment for 50 years, across 3 wars and 2 generations of institutional trauma, through the obsessive repetitions of Cato and the slow mechanical construction of a pretext, through the deliberate humiliation of a disarmed people until they swung at their tormentors and gave Rome the paperwork it needed. Scipio Aemilianus has not invented this. He has inherited it. And what he inherits in the spring of this year is momentum. The terrible, impersonal momentum of an institution that has decided, and decisions of this kind do not require daily renewal. They simply continue. Polybius is with him. The historian watches everything. he will write it down. The harbor district falls first. The Romans secure the port with the methodical efficiency that is their truest genius. Not the genius of inspiration, but the genius of procedure, of soldiers who do not need to be brave so much as they need to be organized, who advance not in passion, but in formation, street by street, block by block, through a city whose architecture they have studied and whose resistance they have calculated. Carthage is a vertical city. Its residential districts rise 6 stories above the narrow streets, and the defenders understand this geometry in a way the Romans initially do not. Every building is a fortress. Every staircase is a choke point. The Romans advance at ground level and the Carthaginians retreat upward, and the city becomes, in those first days, a kind of terrible inversion. The besiegers inside the walls and the defenders above them looking down. Scipio adapts. This is what Rome does. It adapts and it continues. The order is given to burn the lower floors. What follows across the next 17 days is not a battle in any conventional sense. It is a procedure. The Romans advance through streets choked with smoke and falling timber, and above them the defenders retreat from the 2nd floor to the 3rd to the 4th, and when the 4th floor collapses, they fall with it, and the Romans step over them and continue. Polybius writes of soldiers cutting a path through the rubble, of bodies in the streets so dense that progress requires clearing them, of the Roman army treating the city itself as the obstacle rather than its people, because by this point the people and the city have become the same thing. To destroy one is to destroy the other. The Romans understand this with the clarity of professionals. There are moments in the sources that resist easy narration. A woman defending a rooftop, children in the streets, Hasdrubal, the Carthaginian commander who has led the defense for 3 years, who surrenders in the final days and begs for his life, while his wife, watching from a burning temple, calls him a coward and throws herself and her children into the flames. The sources preserve this detail with the precision of men who understand they are recording something that should not be forgotten, even as the institution they serve is doing everything possible to ensure that it is. 17 days. The number has the quality of a fact that should be larger and is somehow worse for being small. By the end of the first week, the residential districts are rubble and smoke. By the end of the second, the Byrsa, the ancient citadel at the city's heart, the original hill where Dido's founding legend places the first Phoenician settlement 8 centuries before, is surrounded. The defenders who remain are not soldiers in any meaningful military sense. They are survivors of a siege that has lasted 3 years. People who have already given everything a city can give, its gold, its hair, its children's futures, and who are now giving the last thing, which is simply the continuation of resistance past the point where resistance means anything except identity. They are defending who they are. They have nothing else left to defend. The Byrsa falls on the 17th day, and now the fires reach the library district. Here the sources become ambiguous, and the ambiguity is itself a kind of testimony. It is not entirely clear whether the burning of Carthage's great library, 500,000 volumes, the accumulated intellectual inheritance of 6 centuries of Phoenician and North African civilization, the agricultural treatises and astronomical tables and medical texts, and the deep empirical record of a people who had learned over generations how to make arid land bloom, is ordered or incidental. The Roman sources do not linger on this question. Later writers will, and their discomfort is visible in the way they phrase it, in the qualifications and the passive constructions, in the sense that they are trying to describe something they cannot quite bring themselves to name directly. But by the time the fires reach those scrolls, the distinction between deliberate and incidental has ceased to matter to anyone holding a torch. This is the thing about institutional momentum. It does not require a specific order to destroy a library. It requires only that the library be in the city, and the city be on fire, and the men with torches be doing what men with torches do in the service of a decision that was made 50 years ago in a Roman Senate chamber by a man holding a fig. The fire does not know the difference between a papyrus scroll containing the secrets of dryland olive cultivation and a wooden beam from a defender's barricade. The fire simply continues. The smoke column from Carthage is visible from Sicily on a clear day. Those who see it know what it means. They have known for 3 years that it was coming, and still, when it comes, something in the watching must be difficult to name. Not grief exactly, for those who have no stake in Carthage's survival. Not triumph entirely, even for those who do. Something more complicated. The smoke of a thing that was not supposed to be possible, rising above the African coast in the spring air, visible across 100 miles of water, and then, slowly, not visible anymore. The survivors number perhaps 50,000. From a city that held at its height several 100,000 people. The mathematics of this does not require elaboration. What it requires is a moment of stillness, because these 50,000 are not abstractions. They are the people who melted their jewelry for Carthage's war machine. They are the women who cut their hair so that the catapults could fire. They are the people who understood, in the second year of the siege and the third, that what they were doing was no longer military strategy, that no strategy remained, but something else, something that does not have a clean name in any language. The refusal to stop being what you are, even when everything around you insists that you have already stopped, that you stopped the moment Rome decided. That the decision is the ending and the resistance is only a delay. They defended their identity for 3 years. They defended it with gold and hair and ingenuity and will. And now they are a transaction. 50,000 people sold into slavery across the markets of the Mediterranean world. Dispersed, separated. The language they speak is no longer the language of a civilization, but the language of individuals who once belonged to one. And that is a different thing entirely. There is no Carthaginian diaspora in the way there will be, later, a Jewish diaspora. No community in exile preserving the texts and the rituals and the stubborn continuity of identity across centuries of displacement. There is no exile community because there is no community. There are 50,000 people in 50,000 different directions, carrying inside them the memory of a city that Rome has decided should not be remembered. The fields are rendered sterile. The sources speak of salt. Their modern historians debate the literalness of this detail, whether the Romans actually sowed the ground with salt, or whether this is a later metaphor that has calcified into fact. What is not debatable is the intention. The intention is that nothing should grow here. The intention is that the land itself should forget. Scipio Aemilianus stands at the edge of the burning city. Polybius is beside him. The historian watches the general's face and sees something unexpected. Tears. Not the tears of a man who has failed, but the tears of a man who has failed, but the tears of a man who has succeeded at something he is not certain he should have done. Polybius asks him what he is thinking, and Scipio speaks, and this exchange, preserved across 2,000 years of transmission, is one of the most extraordinary moments in the ancient record, because what Scipio says is not about Carthage at all. He is thinking, he says, of Rome. He is thinking, he says, of Rome. He is thinking that all cities fall, all civilizations, all empires, that what he is watching in the smoke above the Bursa is not an exception to history, but its pattern, and that the pattern does not exempt the city whose legions he commands, and that someday someone will stand where he is standing and watch Rome burn and feel what he is feeling now, and there will be nothing to be done about it. He quotes Homer. He weeps. Polybius writes it down, and then, and this is the detail that the chapter has been moving toward, the detail that reveals more clearly than any other single fact what Rome has understood about what it has done. Rome does something with the texts that survive. Some volumes are recovered. How many? The sources do not specify. Whether they are saved before the burning reaches the library district, pulled from the shelves by soldiers who understand their value, or whether they are found afterward in the rubble, partially charred, salvageable. This too is ambiguous. What is not ambiguous is what Rome does with them. It does not send them to Rome. It does not place them in Roman libraries, where Roman scholars might study them, where the agricultural knowledge of 6 centuries of North African civilization might be preserved and honored and built upon. It does not treat them as the intellectual treasure they are. The most sophisticated body of agricultural science the ancient world has produced, the empirical record of a people who have spent generations learning how to cultivate soil that no one else could cultivate, soil that no one else could cultivate. Knowledge that the Roman Republic will, in the coming centuries, desperately need as its own farmland degrades and its empire struggles to feed itself. Instead, Rome distributes the texts to its African pliant kings. Scattered across the hinterland, a dozen small kingdoms in the territories surrounding the Ash of Carthage, rulers who owe their positions to Roman favor and whose use of this knowledge will be local and fragmented, and will never again be unified into the coherent intellectual system that produced it. The knowledge will be consulted, but not concentrated. It will be used, but not honored. It will inform the agriculture of people who do not know its origin, applied in pieces across a landscape from which the civilization that created it has been erased. This is not an accident. An accident is what happens when you do not understand what you have. Rome understands exactly what it has. Rome has just destroyed the most dangerous library in the world, and it manages even the ashes with the precision of an institution that knows the difference between knowledge that can be dispersed and knowledge that can be preserved, and has decided, with the cold, clear, institutional intelligence that has been its defining characteristic from the beginning of this story, that Carthage is null, edge must never again be whole, dispersal is the final weapon, the last instrument of erasure. You can burn a library and still fear it, and so you scatter what remains across a dozen kingdoms and 100 years of agricultural practice, and you ensure that no one will ever again be able to stand in a single room and hold the full inheritance of what Carthage knew. Scipio weeps at the burning city and thinks of Rome's mortality. But Rome's final act in the ruins of Carthage is not mourning. It is not triumph. It is fear. Fear does not announce itself. It does not arrive with trumpets or declarations. It settles into the bones of institutions the way cold settles into stone, slowly, invisibly, until the stone itself becomes a different thing than it was. And what Rome carries out of the ruins of Carthage in 146 BCE is not a trophy. It is not a lesson. It is a terror so complete, so thoroughly woven into the fabric of the Republic's self-understanding that the act of destruction becomes its own monument to what was destroyed. Consider what it means to be afraid of a library, not afraid of a fleet or a general or a treasury, afraid of scrolls. Afraid of the patient, accumulated knowledge of farmers and astronomers and physicians who spent their lives writing down what they had learned so that someone who came after them would not have to learn it alone in the dark from the beginning. The Roman Senate understands something in 146 BCE that it will never quite be able to say aloud, that the most dangerous thing Carthage possesses is not its walls or its harbor or its merchant network. It is the organized intelligence of a civilization that has spent 6 centuries learning how to survive. And you cannot defeat intelligence of a Vallisovian that has spent 6 centuries learning how to survive. You cannot negotiate its surrender. You cannot strip it of its fleet and demand reparations and expect it to stop being what it is. The only way to neutralize knowledge is to burn it. And so Rome burns it. But here, on this shore, in this late afternoon light that has not changed since Dido first stood on a saltgrass hillside and looked at the curve of a bay and understood that this was the place, here, at the end of everything, the question that the smoke above Carthage poses to history is not whether Rome was powerful enough to do what it did. The question is what Rome reveals about itself in the doing. Go back to the beginning. Go back to 814 BCE, and the ox hide and the woman who understood that the terms of a negotiation could be transformed by the quality of attention you brought to them. Dido does not ask for more land than she is offered. She asks only for as much as a single ox hide can cover, and then she thinks about what an ox hide actually is, not a fixed area, but a material, a thing with properties, a thing that can be transformed by someone willing to think carefully about its nature. She cuts it into strips, she encircles a hilltop, and in that act of patient, lateral intelligence, she plants the seed of everything that follows. A city founded on the insight that the world rewards careful thinking. A civilization built on the premise that if you pay close enough attention to the actual properties of things, soil, wind, tide, season, the specific behavior of this variety of olive tree in this particular combination of soil and sun, you will find resources that others have walked past without seeing. This is what the 500,000 volumes contain. Not abstractions, not philosophy in the sense that Rome understands philosophy, rhetorical, political, concerned with the exercise of power and the proper conduct of citizens. What the Library of Carthage holds is something more intimate and more durable. It holds the memory of failure. It holds the record of the season when the rains came late and the crop rotation that saved the harvest, written down by a farmer who understood that his grandson might face the same late rains and should not have to discover the solution alone. It holds the olive cultivation techniques developed across generations of observation. Not one farmer's lifetime of observation, but many lifetimes, each one adding to the last, each one correcting the errors of the previous generation with the quiet authority of someone who has actually watched what happens when you prune at the wrong time of year or amend the soil with the wrong material. This is knowledge that cannot be reconstructed from first principles. It is knowledge built from the specific texture of failure, and failure leaves no ruins that can be excavated. When the library burns, the failures burn with it, and without the failures, the successes become unrepeatable. Isolated achievements that no one can build upon because no one knows the ground they stand on. The crop rotation treatises alone represent something that the ancient world will not recover for centuries. The Carthaginian agricultural hinterland, the rich, difficult, rewarding territory of what is now Tunisia, has been worked and worried over and gradually, painstakingly improved across generations until it produces yields that North Africa will not see again until the modern era. The farmers who created those yields do not survive to teach what they know. They are sold into slavery, or they die in the 17 days of street fighting that precedes the final collapse, and what they carry in their heads goes with them into silence. What remains of their knowledge, the written record, the organized inheritance of 6 centuries of empirical observation, burns in the library, and Rome, having burned it, distributes the agricultural texts it bothers to save not to Roman libraries, but to African client kings, because the Senate understands that this knowledge is too valuable to destroy entirely and too dangerous to honor publicly. You cannot honor the knowledge of the civilization you have just erased. Honoring it would require acknowledging what it was, and acknowledging what it was would require confronting what you have done. So the knowledge scatters. It disperses into the agricultural practices of kingdoms that will themselves eventually be absorbed or overrun or forgotten. And the chain of transmission breaks, and what was once a coherent system, 6 centuries of accumulated, cross-referenced, tested and retested understanding of how to make difficult land sustain human life, becomes fragments, rumors, isolated techniques without their cons, extinct, tools without the hands that knew how to use them. Rome, in the centuries that follow, struggles to feed itself. Its own farmland degrades. The small farmers who once formed the backbone of the Republic are displaced by large estates worked by slave labor that has no incentive to observe carefully, to write down what it learns, to think about the long-term health of the soil it is compelled to work. The agricultural knowledge that Rome burned was precisely the knowledge Rome will later desperately need, and the irony is not lost on the historians who chronicle the Republic's decline. But irony is cold comfort when the soil is exhausted and the harvests are failing, and the thing that might have helped is ash above a city that Rome has decided should never have existed. And then there is Scipio. Scipio Aemilianus stands at the edge of the burning city and weeps. His companion, the historian Polybius, is with him, and Polybius asks him why he weeps at the moment of his greatest victory, and Scipio says, or Polybius records him as saying, which in the ancient world is as close to the same thing as we will ever get, that he is thinking of Rome, that he is thinking of the mutability of human things, that he is looking at Carthage burning and seeing with the terrible clarity that only the perpetrators of great violence ever fully achieve, that what he has just done to this city, history will one day do to his. This is not guilt. Guilt would be easier. Guilt would at least imply that Scipio believes he should have done otherwise. What Scipio feels is something more vertiginous and more honest than guilt. It is recognition. He has just demonstrated, with the full resources of the Roman state and the best military mind of his generation, that no city is permanent, that no accumulation of knowledge or beauty or commercial sophistication or agricultural mastery is sufficient protection against a rival that has decided in the cold arithmetic of existential fear that your continued existence is intolerable. He has proven this theorem by solving it. And in the solving, he has also proven it about Rome. Polybius records this exchange because he understands that it is the moral center of everything he has witnessed. He is a Greek, Polybius, a man from a civilization that Rome has already absorbed, already transformed into a province of Roman cultural aspiration, already made into a mirror in which Rome admires its own reflection. He has watched, from the particular vantage point of the conquered intellectual, as Rome has become the thing it feared. He writes it down. He makes sure the moment survives, because he understands that the moment is not about Scipio's private grief. It is about the logic of empire. It is about what happens when the deepest fear of a civilization is not defeat, but the survival of a rival capable of recovering. Carthage's tragedy is not that it was defeated. Defeat is the common condition of cities and civilizations across the full sweep of human history. Defeat can be survived. Defeat can even, in the long run, be generative. The defeated civilization carrying its knowledge into exile, adapting, transmitting, finding new forms. What happens to Carthage is not defeat. It is erasure. The deliberate, systematic, carefully administered destruction, not merely of a city, but of a civilization's capacity to remember itself. No diaspora, no exile community carrying the language into foreign courts. No manuscripts smuggled out in the night by scholars who understood what was coming. Only ash and the slave markets, and the silence that follows when a people is not merely conquered but unmade. The sea does not remember. This is the fact that the late afternoon light on the North African coast makes undeniable. The hammered bronze water that caught the reflection of Dido's first fires on a salt-grass shore in 814 BCE catches the reflection of Carthage's last fires in 146 BCE with the same indifferent beauty. The Mediterranean does not mourn, it does not record, it moves in its ancient patterns. The same currents that carried Phoenician merchant ships from Tyre. The same winds that filled Hannibal's transport vessels. The same swells that rocked the Roman siege fleet. And it carries nothing forward but the motion itself. What it carries forward in the memory of history is the precedent. This is what Scipio's tears are really about. Not the specific city burning behind him, not the specific civilization whose smoke is rising into the specific sky of a specific afternoon in 146 BCE. What he mourns, with the full weight of a man who has just done an irreversible thing, is the demonstration effect, the proof of concept, the evidence, now written in fire and ash into the historical record, that civilizational erasure is possible. that a rival can be destroyed so thoroughly that it ceases to exist not merely as a political entity, but as a memory, as a presence in the world's understanding of what human intelligence can build, and what human intelligence can build, and what human patience can learn. Every subsequent act of deliberate cultural annihilation in the Western record stands in the shadow of what Rome does to Carthage. Every library burned, every language suppressed, every archive destroyed, every people stripped of the written record of their own accumulated knowledge. All of it echoes back to this shore, to this afternoon, to this particular quality of light on water that has forgotten everything that stood before it. What was built here was irreplaceable, and what endures here, in the long, indifferent afternoon that follows the burning, is the question that Scipio cannot answer, and Rome cannot escape, and history cannot stop asking. Not whether Carthage deserved to survive. Survival is not a matter of desert. It is a matter of power, and power has its own brutal grammar. The question is simpler and more terrible than that. What did we lose when we decided that the most dangerous thing a civilization could do was know too much, remember too carefully, and survive too well? The sea offers no answer. It moves in its old patterns, bronze and indifferent, above a shore that remembers nothing and forgets nothing, because forgetting requires that something remain to do the forgetting. And here, on this coast, in this light, there is only the water and the wind, and the long silence of a civilization that was so brilliantly, so completely, so irrevocably itself, that the only way the world could continue without it was to pretend it had never been.